And the people of Israel said to Moses, "Behold, we perish. Look, we perish. 15,000 of us have died. Moses, look, we are dying."
Please join us this week as Pastor Steve Brower continues our series in the book of Numbers, looking at Numbers 18, verses 1 through 7. This section of Scripture is part of a larger development in Numbers 18 and 19, which seeks to answer the fear and questions of the Israelites in Numbers 17, 12 through 13.
Numbers chapter 17, the very last part of 17, Numbers 17:12. We'll be looking through chapter 18, verse number 7. We took a break after Numbers 17 to celebrate Jesus as our Savior during the Christmas season. And as we get back into the book of Numbers, we need to remind ourselves of the context so that we can properly appreciate the passage that we are dealing with, because it has just been a little bit of some time that has passed. Most recently, in the flow of the narrative and what is happening as we work our way through the book of Numbers, most recently, we observed the rebellion of Korah and Dathan. Dathan was with those, and Dathan had a number of people with him, and they challenged the authority of Moses. They argued that Moses was driven by a desire to set himself up as a prince or a pharaoh over them. And even the language that they used kind of hinted at that idea. They left Pharaoh in Egypt, and Moses was going to become a prince over them. And so they were taking a shot at Moses and his leadership. And so Dathan and company rebelled against the authority of God by rejecting the authority of the person that God had called to lead Israel. And so God dealt with them literally by opening up the ground and swallowing them whole into the earth. So this is Numbers chapter 16. And as soon as he had finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart, the earth opened up and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up." So that was a big deal. That was a significant moment in the life of the Israelites as they were on their way towards the promised land. So you have Dathan rebelling. We also see Korah rebelling. So now you have Korah and 250 chiefs of the congregation. And so these are 250 people that were part of the regular congregation, right? The regular assembly. And they all got together. They believed that they should be able to offer sacrifices before God. And so they engaged in a test. They all took their censers, where they would put the coals into the censer and then incense on the coal, and they brought those before the Lord to see if he would accept it. Now, of course, we would look at that and we would say that is really taking your life into your own hands, but they felt confident that they would be accepted by God, and so they put themselves to the test. We could say they put God to the test. Moses warned them against it, but ultimately they determined to do it. They felt like maybe Moses was elevating himself unduly, that Moses was pretending like he was the only one that could present offering to the gods, or to God, and that they maybe could do the same. But in truth, God approached them in the Shekinah glory, and out of that fire he came forward. And what happened? Numbers chapter 16, verse number 16. Moses said to Korah, "Be present, you and all your company, before the Lord, you and they and Aaron tomorrow, and let every one of you take his censer and put incense in it, and every one of you bring before the Lord his censer, 250 censers. You also and Aaron each his censers." You can imagine Korah, 250 leaders in the congregation, and Aaron, and they all come before the Lord to say, who is God going to accept? So every man took his censer, put fire in them, laid incense on them, stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron, Aaron, then Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. And we see in verse 35 of the same chapter, fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering the incense. And so those bronze censers were then taken and hammered into a covering for the altar, if you remember that. When they would go to the altar, and it was already overlaid with bronze, but God had commanded that you take all of those censers of those men who had been consumed and you make a plate, a bronze plate, a covering, some sort of identifying marker that they would then put over the altar. So now the Israelites would come before God to offer their altar, and they would see a memorial to the 250 who had died because they did not believe what God had said, and they ultimately challenged Aaron's authority to be the one who could offer offerings before the Lord. This, of course, terrified, upset the people. And it drew them into such a position and attitude of discontent that they grumbled against Moses and Aaron. In fact, in verse number 41 of chapter 16, it says, "But on the next day." Isn't that just mind-numbing to think about? But on the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." They turned against Moses and Aaron, and ultimately decided to put the blame at their feet. And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned towards the tent of meeting. If you imagine a mob, here in Minnesota we're very used to mobs, right? So it's hard to imagine, but if you could imagine a mob of people that were driven by just a desire for what? Just the mob rule. And in this case, for Moses and Aaron, it was a desire to turn against them. They turned towards the tent of meeting. If you can just picture this in your mind, they're grumbling. They all turn towards the tent of meeting, and bam, the Shekinah glory appears. And at that moment, you have to be going, I think we have erred. I think we've made a mistake. But it was too late. And so God told Moses and Aaron, he said, "Get away from the congregation because I'm going to consume them in an instant." God was ticked. And Moses and Aaron pled before the Lord and said, "Don't consume them." And then Moses said, "Aaron," which is kind of amusing, "you should get your censer and go out into the middle of that to stop God from destroying the people." But, it was Aaron's responsibility, right? He was the high priest, all the things. I don't think Moses had ill will towards Aaron at that moment. So that's what he tells Aaron to do, and Aaron does, and it's really a beautiful picture, and we had talked about this last time. So Aaron takes his censer, he fills it with the fire, the coals from the altar, he pours incense on it, and he runs out into the middle of the people. God is effecting a plague upon the people, and Aaron stands there between life and death, is how Scripture describes it. Verse 47 of chapter 16. "So Aaron took it as Moses said and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on the incense, and he made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped." Man, what a awesome event that would have been. As Aaron stood between the dead and the living. Verse number 49, "Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah." So about 15,000 people died as they dealt with this rebellion against the Lord. That really is startling, isn't it? What an incredible series of events. And what do you make of this if you're an Israelite? Okay, if you're an Israelite, what do you make of all of this? That you're on your way to the promised land because God said, "I'm going to give you a land, I'm going to give you an inheritance, I'm going to take care of you." And yet in the midst of that, you have all of these different events happening. 15,000 people were killed by God on your way to the promised land. What do you think of God? How do you process this? Does God really want what is best for us as Israelites? And so this drives forward the end of chapter 17, verse 12 and 13. And the people of Israel said to Moses, "Behold, we perish. Look, we perish. 15,000 of us have died. Moses, look, we are dying. We're undone. We're all undone. Everyone who comes near to the tabernacle of the Lord shall die. Are we all to perish?" And it's a pretty valid question, isn't it? And God answers their questions by offering 3 provisions in the next 2 chapters. So in chapter 18 and chapter 19, God is really answering this question at the end of chapter 17. So as we get into chapter 18, we're going to look at the very first provision. The first provision is that God says, listen, there really is safe access to me. And I'm going to reinforce this point. There is safe access to me. And so in the first 7 verses of chapter 18, as an answer to this question at the end of 17, he says, you have access to me and it is safe. But then he also says in verse 8 through 32, he says, I also am going to provide you a rich fullness, that I am going to give you provision. And he launches into a whole retelling of how he has provided for them and will provide for them. And then in the third answer is that he talks about the red heifer, which is all about restorative cleanliness, or cleanness, depending on how you want, which word you want to use, I suppose. Restorative cleanness. So he says, here is what happens when you become unclean, and the utilization of the red heifer is the way to become clean again. You say, I don't know much about the red heifer. You will learn about the red heifer, but not today. We will learn about that, not next time, but the time after that, because each of these we will spend a message on, because all of these are fairly unfamiliar to us. We aren't coming with a lot of knowledge to the book of Numbers. So this morning, we're going to focus on this first response, Numbers chapter 18, verse 1 through 7. The idea that God provides safe access to himself. God provides safe access. It would have been understanding on some level for the people of Israel to wonder, does God really want us to access him? Maybe this is God just making it clear that access is not really something we should desire. That maybe he's saying access is not for us. But the answer to this from God is a resounding yes. I want you to have access to me. The challenge is that God is sovereign and he is holy and we are not. And so our access to him must be on his terms and not our terms. And if we're honest, that's a challenge for us to accept. Hey, if we're being completely honest, we have a very high opinion of ourselves and our ideas. And it's difficult for us to accept the decisions of others with which we disagree. We have a submission problem. Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that? That can become a challenge for us? When somebody tells us we should do something that we don't think we should do, is there something within you that says, I don't want to do that? And you say, well, that's common to everybody. And I would say, yeah, and that's our problem, is that we have a submission problem when it comes even to God. For Israel, God had provided access. But he also made it clear how they were to access him, and that is just really hard for us to accept. So God took action to make it clear that his way was non-negotiable, and 15,000 died. Is that acceptable? Is that appropriate? We must remember that God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. At a basic level, this means that there will be some aspects of God's actions, some parts of God's thinking, that I am going to have a hard time accepting, because he is not going to think the way that I think. It's just, he doesn't process it the same way. And if I know that, it will help me to consider carefully how to proceed in my life with God. And God begins his encouragement to Israel that they can have safe access by pointing out that different servants have different tasks. So look at Numbers chapter 18, verse number 1. God calls his servants to different tasks. Verse number 1. So the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons and your father's house with you shall bear iniquity connected with the sanctuary. And you and your sons with you shall bear iniquity connected with your priesthood. Okay, let's just break this apart. Who is he talking about? You and your sons. That's Aaron and his sons and your father's house. Okay, well, who is that? He's talking about Aaron's ancestral home, right? His ancestral line. He's talking about the Kohathites. The Kohathites were those that were charged earlier with transporting the holy items in the sanctuary, in the Holy of Holies, in the tabernacle. So he is making it clear here that Aaron and the priesthood, Aaron and his sons, were in charge of the holy items, but Aaron's household, the Kohathites, were also in charge with transporting the holy things when the tabernacle was taken down and they moved to a new spot. And so he's saying, you folks have charge of the holy things, and he's ramping it up. He's saying, you will bear iniquity, not just if you violate my commands, but if anybody violates my commands. So what God does is he says, safe access for all of Israel will be dependent upon these servants performing their task well. And he puts that onus upon Aaron and his sons, the priesthood, and also upon the Kohathites. The second tier would be the Levites. That's verse number 2 through 5. And with you bring your brothers also, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, that they may join you and minister to you while you and your sons with you are before the tent of the testimony. They shall keep guard over you and over the whole tent, but shall not come near to the vessels of the sanctuary or to the altar, lest they and you die. Okay, so he's ramping it up. He is ultimately saying the Levites then are that next tier, and they're to keep everybody away from approaching a holy God. They're to keep everybody at a distance so that they don't die and so that you don't die. And so this onus is laid upon now the Levites. So if we have the first tier, Aaron, the priesthood, you have the second tier, the Levites. All of them are there to provide access for the people of Israel. God is making it clear that he wants to give them access, and he is saying, here is how you may do it. Verse number 4, they shall join you and keep guard over the tent of meeting for all the service of the tent, and no outsider shall come near you. No outsider. He's not talking about somebody who is not part of Israel. He is talking about somebody who is not a Levite and who is not a priest. And you shall keep guard, verse 5, over the sanctuary, over the altar, that there may never again be wrath on the people of Israel. Here's the motive of God, that there will never again be wrath upon the people of Israel. So he says, I'm building these tiers in. The Levites, the priesthood, in order that people might have access to God. That reason is crucial. This hierarchy that he is creating is for their good. It's to help them, not to hinder them. And this is the lie of the devil, that the restrictions of God are there to oppress you and control you and keep you from good things. That is a lie that the devil has told from the beginning. When Satan approached Eve, Satan pointed out to Eve that God was keeping something good from her by restraining her from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so he made the argument that God did not have her best interests at heart. And to a certain degree, that is what happens in all of our hearts whenever we are tempted to do any sin. Think about that for a moment. Because God says, if I know that it's a sin, and God has said don't do it, and I think that I want to do it, on some level, I am believing that what God says about it is wrong. That he really doesn't want what's good for me. I know what's good for me, and it's this sin, whatever it is. And God really doesn't want what's good for me. And on some level, that's what has to happen in order for me then to engage in sin. I believe that God's right, or that God is not right, and that this sin is good for me. And to some degree, that's all that's happening here, is that we're dealing with the same kind of idea. God is setting up these boundaries because they are actually good for them. Have you ever been to a museum where they have signs up and they have workers walking around, and those workers are watching you as you get close to that piece of art, whatever that piece of art might be? And if you start to lean into the piece of art, those workers get really nervous. Have you ever been in a place like that? And if you started to reach out like you were going to touch that piece of art, what would happen? That worker might say something. There might even be an alarm that you might cross over that, and there might be an alarm, and they may even have a severe word with you and say, listen, you can no longer be here in the museum because you are going to violate the opportunity for other generations to see the piece of art by your carelessness, right? And we all understand that, probably. Now, maybe you are so independent that you rise up against even that. How dare they tell me how I should treat this piece of art? But we also recognize that on some level that is actually good and proper, that they know that getting the oil from your hands on that piece of art will deteriorate it and it creates a problem for future generations. That it's actually best for you to not have the joy of touching that piece of art because it's going to preserve it for other people. Is that best for you? Yes. Is it restrictive? Yes. Is it best for others? It is. And in some ways, we all understand that. And this is part and parcel of what God has constantly done for us. That He has given us regulations, restrictions, rules within His Word. But friends, we must believe that these are actually for our good and not for our ill. That they are there because of God's love for us, not because of His desire to restrict us. And ultimately, this is what the Israelites were wrestling with as well. And so when we think about these servants called to different tasks, we're reminded that roles are necessary because Aaron and his sons needed to have a priesthood where they could perform their duties. And that role was a necessary thing. The Levites were set apart for a particular purpose. They had a role. And in that role, it was a necessary thing. Everybody in that sense did not have the same role. If they did, there would be mass confusion. And so God's ordered manner was to set up these different roles over and over again. And we see that all around us. We're used to that now. And friends, we ought not fight against that. Roles are a necessary thing. But we also should recognize that roles do not determine worth. And I think it's really important for us to embrace this. Aaron did not have more worth than any other Israelite. Your role is not indicative of your value. And I think that's really important for us to embrace. And whether you're talking about a role in a spiritual sense or a role in a leadership sense, whatever it might be, this is why husbands and wives have different roles, but yet they are completely and entirely equal in value before God. And this is the case with everybody. I have a role as a pastor of this church, but that does not make me have more value than anybody else. I have a different role. I'm called to a different task, but yet I don't have a different value. And this is constantly the case with how God organizes these roles. Roles are necessary. Roles do not determine worth, but roles ought to be respected. Context changes everything. If you are the captain of a soccer team and you fail in your role and you make a bunch of bad decisions, what might be the outcome? What might happen? You get fired. Yeah, you might get fired. You might lose the game. If you are the captain of an airplane and you make a bunch of bad decisions, what might happen? People might die. Is that a bigger deal? Yes. Yes, it is. That is a bigger deal. So depending on your role, determines to some degree a level of respect. Isn't that a fair statement? Because as you are put into those roles, you are put into those positions of authority, and you have to then respond to each of them. You think about Aaron. What responsibility did Aaron have? He was the high priest of Israel. He had a massive responsibility for the well-being of the spiritual state of the people of Israel. And it was an important thing from that standpoint. And so when you see all of the warnings and the threats of death that were laid out in this chapter, chapter 18, we recognize the severity with which God is talking about. Verse number 1 through 7 talks about this at least no less than 4 times. It says, so they, the Levites, will not die, neither they nor you. Verse 3, but the stranger must not draw near to you. Verse 4, so there will be no longer wrath against the sons of Israel. Verse 5, but the stranger who draws near will be put to death. Verse 7. And so again and again in these 7 verses, God is emphasizing how important the role is for the Levites and for the Aaronic priesthood, for Aaron and his sons. This is crucial for us to capture and understand. These are important things. Micah had sent me a picture this morning. Micah Tanis had sent me a picture this morning of him at Shiloh. Micah is over in Israel, if you did not know that. Luke is actually over there with him because the trip from Malta to Israel is very short and inexpensive. If you do a particular airline, which Luke knows, because if you know Luke, Luke knows all those kinds of things. And so Luke joined Micah. They were in Shiloh today. And he sent me a picture, and I was going to put it up on the screen, and then I forgot. So sorry about that. It's horrible, isn't it? Pictures are worth 1,000 words. So imagine Luke and Micah at Shiloh. Now, why do I bring that up? Shiloh, for 300 years, the tabernacle was at Shiloh. And so I asked Micah, I was like, did you stand in the Holy of Holies? And he said, no, they wouldn't let me. And then he said, hashtag instant death. And of course, for him, that wouldn't be the case. But for an Israelite at that time, that would be. Because God had determined that was his access, and to do it improperly was to bring the unholy into the presence of the holy. These roles were crucial for providing the proper access. God calls his servants to different tasks. God desires for his people to have access to himself. The reality is that he made a way for the Israelites. The really terrible thing for Israel to believe would be that God actually did not want them to have access to him. Because that was a lie from the very pit of hell. That God does not want them to have access to him. That is not true. It's for this reason that we are told so much about what's occurring here. Why have all the laws, all the legislation? Why all the sacrifices? Why study them now? It's like, why are we in Numbers? Because through it we see our God revealed. It's good for us to understand why they were there. Because without that understanding, without that basis, the New Testament, some of its import and significance, some of its weight is reduced. Because we simply don't know enough to realize how weighty it is. It's not because the rules make someone holy, it's because God is holy and he was making a path for an unholy people to walk with a holy God. And what a glorious thing. So rather than looking at the rules as oppressive weights intended to pound us down or help or convince us that we are terrible people, we ought to view them as they were intended. God's gracious commands which allow us to walk with him as an unholy people. Because that's what they were intended to be. They are life-giving. They are not death-dealing. Yet if we ignore them, we will find death. There are many, many places in the Old Testament that we could go to discuss this further, but let me just read one part of Psalm 119. This is verse 33 through 40. And just listen here to the life-giving power of the law. That's ultimately how the psalmist was viewing it. And he's talking about these same regulations that we're dealing with. Psalm 119, verse 33, teach me, O Lord, the way of your statutes. I will keep it to the end. Give me understanding that I may keep your law and observe it with my whole heart. Lead me in the path of your commandments, for I delight in it. Incline my heart to your testimonies and not to selfish gain. Turn my eyes from looking at worthless things and give me life in your ways. Confirm to your servant your promise that you may be feared. Turn away the reproach that I dread, for your rules are good. Behold, I long for your precepts. In your righteousness, give me life. I'll tell you, boy, if you took Psalm 119 and you meditated upon it, what you would discover is a deep love for these very rules and regulations that might battle against our soul in today's age. And that deep love is because those rules and regulations were intended to open up the path for people to be able to walk with a holy God. What a glorious thing that is. He made a way for the Israelites. He made a better way for the church. Does that sound arrogant? To say that we have it better? Well, it would be if it were not true, or if we had anything to do with it. But that is actually the testimony of our God given to us in the book of Hebrews. Jesus is the better way. What he has done is a better way. And so he did make a better way for the church. We see that because Jesus is fully God and fully man. This better way is demonstrated through this person that is Jesus, fully God and fully man. Pastor Bernie read this passage. Let's just ponder it a little bit more. Since then we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens. And when you think about passing through the heavens, think of passing through the veil. That's the idea, right? He passed through the heavens. He's a high priest. He went from the holy place into the Holy of Holies. Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Help in the time of need. I think something had gotten misplaced there. Look at the next verse. It says, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. So just contemplate this with us. Here you have Aaron. Can you imagine being an Israelite? And you're like, I need to approach a holy God? And it's like, how can I approach a holy God? He is God. And I have learned that he is very holy. I have 15,000 deaths to remind me of the fact that he is holy. And I want to be careful how I approach him. How do I approach him? And it's like, if only I had somebody that I could use as a mediator to approach him through. And it's like, well, that's Aaron. And it's like, I can go to Aaron. But the problem with Aaron is not God. And so Aaron does not fully understand God. He understands me, but he does not fully understand God. And so he is a good choice. He's a better choice than me alone, but he is not the best choice. What's the other choice? I don't have another choice. I have to go through Aaron. But now we have Jesus, who is God and man. And so we relate to him because we understand him and he understands us. But he relates to God because he understands God and God understands him. And he is the perfect mediator that exists. What an awesome thing for us to embrace. I didn't bring this up to Mariah, so hopefully she doesn't mind if I use this as an example. What can she say now? She's giving me the look, right? Mariah we're in the process of trying to get physical therapy for Mariah down in Iowa. And to do that, we have to jump through a bunch of insurance hoops. And if you have ever worked with any kind of organization, especially insurance organizations, you talk to somebody and you say, here's what they need, and they completely understand, and then they provide it for you, right? Is that what happens? Or they say, oh, look, here's a button I can push, and it's like, there, I'll give you what I have. And you say, no, I need something different than that. I need something like this. And it's like, well, I don't have that button. I don't think I can help you, right? And so then you call somebody else. And what are you looking for? You are looking for that one person that you get on the line that actually knows the system, and they know what you're asking, and they can get you what you need. That's what you're looking for. And you're just looking for that one person. And you call up, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and then you get somebody, and then you try to decide, is this that person? And you can usually tell pretty quick. And then it's like, all right, this is not going to go well. I'm going to call back later. Because what do you need? You need that person. That's Jesus. That's Jesus. He's that person. He understands you. He understands God. And he is willing to go to him. Man, that's startling, isn't it? We have the opportunity to enter into the very presence of God because of Jesus and to lay out our request before him. And if the weight of it could just sink in, and you say, how do I make that weight heavier? Think about what that was like for the Israelites. Think how different it is for us, that we can go directly to God. I mean, that's a mind-blowing thing. You bring that up to an Israelite, they're going to be fearful. It's like, we watched so many people die. I don't want to go to God. I'll go to Aaron. I'm not going to go to God. But this is what we have. And so verse 16, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace. What a mind-numbing concept. We can walk with confidence into the throne of grace. That we can come and just lay these things out, that we might receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. This is our God who loves us so much that he sent Jesus to stand between him, holy, us, unholy, so that he could help us in our time of need. This isn't Jesus twisting his arm. This is God sending away. This isn't like an Old Testament God who's angry and a New Testament God who's loving. This is the God who says, I'm going to make a better way for us. Wow, we're loved. We're loved. What a tremendous opportunity that we have. And it becomes all the more weighty when we understand what it was like for the Old Testament believer. He is fully God and fully man. He is also an eternal high priest. He is an eternal high priest. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25, consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Since he always lives to make intercession for them. Jesus is one who does not pass away. He is not one that has to be kind of recycled, as you will. He is an eternal high priest who will always be there. We also see that he is righteous. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 19 through 25. Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus. Don't you love how the author of Hebrews keeps talking about the confidence to enter the holy place? And for us, that seems like not that big a deal, but that's because we're so blessed that we don't realize how big a deal it was. But for them, that was a massive deal. Confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh. And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. For he who promised is faithful. Well, there's a lot in that verse, but let me just focus on that last part. For he who promised is faithful. The opportunity that we have to enter and have access to God is because of the faithfulness of Jesus. It is not our righteousness, because if it was our righteousness, I would never be able to talk to God. But even if I had that moment where I was just forgiven, the next moment I would no longer be able to talk to God. But I can go constantly before him. Why? Because of the faithfulness of Jesus himself. Because of his righteousness. What a glorious concept. And so for the Old Testament believer, they go, they offer the sacrifice, and they know they will need to return and offer another sacrifice again and again and again. Just repeat. Rinse and repeat over and over again. But we are blessed because Jesus was that singular sacrifice once for all offered up for us. What a glorious truth it is. So we look at this response from God to the Israelites. They were crying out in fear, and we understand their fear. Their question was, can anybody ever approach God? If I could put it in my language. How can we ever approach God? And he wanted to reiterate to them, he wanted to make it very clear to them, you have access to me and it is safe. I have set up the regulations. Just abide by them. What he has done for us is he has blown that apart and he has opened up the door. And in the midst of our abundance, almost in the midst of our prosperity and our luxury, we forget how luxurious we have it. And it's good for us to be reminded of the access that we have to God. When we consider these truths, it should cause us to desire to go to him more boldly, confidently, but also in times of need, to approach him, to find that grace and to find that mercy.